Welcome, everybody. I'm Rita McGrath, professor at Columbia Business School, and I'm talking to you remotely from Princeton, New Jersey. And my guest today is David Kidder, the CEO and co-founder of Bionic, which we're going to hear a lot more about shortly. But as we're getting going, a couple of housekeeping things. So the webinar is being recorded, so please don't put anything in here that you don't want preserved for posterity. It does mean also that if you registered for the webinar, you'll be able to access the recordings. The format is pretty free form. We will try to leave room for your questions. If we don't get to a question in the context of the live conversation, David and I will touch base and get back to you with answers at some point in the future, because I'm sure that'll be really, really interesting. Okay, should we do this thing?
Yeah, excited.
Okay. So, David, I'm just absolutely delighted that we're having a second part conversation. In this part, I'd like to really focus on you and your work. And I thought we could just start with a bit of background about you, about Bionic, what you do, what your philosophy is, because I think it may not be as well known to people that aren't right in our little community here.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, very grateful, Rita. I know it's a wild moment for everyone, but always love getting time with you and finding ways to more deeply integrate what we do on top of your pioneering work. Your contributions have been a huge part of what Bionic does and what we talk about in the world. Bionic is now 7 years old. It's a bootstrap startup in New York City, or I'd say distributed around New York City now. A little over 50 people. And I've been a startup founder now 4 times, 3 venture-backed SaaS companies, 2 work, 1 didn't. And an angel investor about 40 startups in the last 15 years through 2 personal funds. And as a side hustle, I just like to work with teams to write articles and books. I had 2 in business, the Startup Playbook, and now most recently New to Big, which really describes Bionic's model, which is around this concept of a growth operating system. The idea, thank you, the idea that every company needs to do that $0 to $100 million discovery of growth. And our model produces that outcome. So it's kind of prescient as well. There's the demand in the world for growth is quite extraordinary now, and will be required by everybody as the customer needs in the world have all been changed.
Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about when you say install a growth operating system. I think I know what it means, but maybe people that are viewing might not know what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, in principle, it frames what companies have today, which is in most cases the big to bigger, the organization machine that is about planning, and it's about knowability in a way. It does administration by degree around the markets that exist. And one of the big mindset shift is shifting from, we call it TAM to TAP, from a total addressable marketplace view of the world, which is planned, and to a total addressable problem or need view of the world. And in that shift is going from linear to portfolio theory, really, because in discovery, it's really about the unknowable. It's about launching a large volume of small bets into a need or problem, not tech, not what we know, but to answer, what is the customer problem? What is our solution, our proprietary gift in solving it? That $0 to $100 million in revenue, that first discovery revenue, has really been solved as a management level. It's called venture capital and entrepreneurship. So in the same way we teach at a master's degree level administration, this skill is actually adoptable and doable as an integrated way of working. And that growth transformation is what Bionic does for large organizations all over the world, P&G, Citigroup, Nike, and others. It's been a huge impact on their ability to have adaptability and speed in this moment.
Mm-hmm. And something I've talked about for years is that the whole growth space is kind of where quality was like 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. 50 years ago, if you'd said to somebody, tell me about your quality process, before we had Deming and Duran and people that said, no, this is actually a methodology, people would have said things like, well, we inspect carefully and we train a lot and, we make sure we have people that can look at things. We didn't understand Six Sigma, black belts, all that stuff. And I really think the whole growth uncertainty problem is at a moment where we're starting to realize there is a replicable, disciplined methodology around it. And I think Bionic's at the forefront of this, as is people like Alex Osterwalder, who was on a few weeks ago, really sort of decoding that mysterious process. I mean, we don't have to be, Steve Jobs in black turtlenecks to do this. And we don't have to be 22 years old either, which is kind of encouraging. So you talked in a recent blog about the Great Reset. and the moment that we're in, and that sort of cautious, careful management is not really going to be fit for purpose right now. And I'd love to just hear, so what's the alternative? What does that look like? And how should people be thinking about the management style, the practice of management right now?
Well, at a behavior level, there's always there's kind of three intertwined sort of mindsets that, if you listen obviously to your research, or Adam Grant, who's also an advisor to Bionic, others, around control bias, right? Normalcy bias and loss aversion. So central to this moment is the desire to control something, right? We do this whether it be retail therapy in our lives, or it's around trying to get our arms around the situation. And that control bias makes typically bad decisions right now, because you're trying to control something that's not controllable and is changing.
I see that a lot.
Yeah, and the other one is loss aversion, which is, we're trying to hang on to our goals that we want to return to. And so that return is a loss, and that loss aversion stops us from letting go and moving forward and grasping to that next thing. And lastly is just normalcy. Like, even for our own lives, those biases are sort of a potent cocktail that stop change. And so that leads to decision-making that is about preservation. And the big to bigger skills that get us to the top right now of around doing that work at a systems level, that ability to operate at will. As you pointed out earlier, the Six Sigma 30 years ago was not a thing, but today everyone does lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, ERP, real-time data. We've mastered the ability to operate at will. And it begs the question, which is, why can't we grow at will? Why can't we turn on growth today as we could just operate at will? That an unimaginable thing 30 years ago, I could take my domestic product and take it globally, is table stakes. Yeah. But growth is not. And so I think this moment is really about a couple pioneering companies, worked with 26 in the last 7 years, who now do this as a way of working. And there's 1,000 more at least who need to be able to get this capability across the whole organization, so it can react and discover, not just 5 times a year with a super expensive consulting firm saying, here's the future, but 1,000 times a year as a way of working to increase the odds that they're there when it happens, because growth lives in outside forces.
Absolutely. One of the other biases I'll throw into the mix here is it's called the Parmenides fallacy. And I don't know if you've ever run across this, but there was this Greek guy, who I presume was called Parmenides, who said, when we're making decisions about how to make investments, and of course that's on everybody's mind right now, cash is going to be scarce, and what do we spend our time and money on? And he said, what people will do, a bias, is we compare state A, which is where we are today, with state B, which is what we're looking at tomorrow. And very often we find state A to be much more preferable. And so we don't make the investment because state B compared to state A doesn't look good. The right comparison is not state A to B, it's state B to C if we do nothing. And the fallacy is we compare a future to a present that we think we know, rather than let's look at where the future could be if we do nothing or if we make other kinds of choices. And so it's that future to future comparison we really need to be thinking about. And I think it's just such a clear way of describing it, because as you said, a lot of people right now are kind of, but I liked the growth economy, and I liked coming into work, and I liked, not having my kids underfoot, and we're already starting to see, I find this astonishing, but protest movements about people saying, we've been home long enough, and all the scientists are going, no, don't do that. But I think it's kind of fascinating that that sort of ability to overlook, valid scientific information is just quite interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep.
So out of all this chaos, you've talked about geopolitical chaos, the financial plunge, but that this also is going to create some opportunities. So, prediction's impossible, I know that, but what might some things happen that, I think you've called it the Great Reset, some things that might be different as we think about the future?
Well, the spirit of the Great Reset was really is a series of 3 pieces. One is about what just happened and how to think about that, and then secondly is as an outside force. So then the second one we're just publishing this week is called The New Now and the New Future, which is, okay, what does that mean for me and my company? Mm-hmm. And the third one, which we're writing, will come out next week, is called The Refounder, which is what's my job now? Like, what's my job in the leadership team? And it's really a framework to think about large force as a team, force as an individual. And in this moment, there's just, the world is awash in recommendations and leadership and stuff right now. The noise in the space of like, how to lead, how to do, everybody's all over this. And the spirit of what we did, it was actually, and said it was really much more vulnerable because, as a startup founder with a small company, like that struggle of those questions is one we're just asking for ourselves, asking as an individual, as a founder and CEO, and just putting it out there of a way to think, not to tell, but to share what that journey is like. Largely for the team, when is to separate for the past, which is the acceptance part. The reset is about letting that go, to your points around the behavioral psychology and recognizing those. But then it's the work, right? And I think there's two things that have to happen simultaneously. One is to create a new now, which is to reset the metrics, reset the goals, all the expectations around really uniting the team in its resolve in this moment about what is the work to do with what we have now. And that also means, so good from uniting, is also resetting expectations, which is we got to be solving acute to broad needs in the world as we move through this. And the third element of the new now is just how do we rebalance and rescale into the reality? So that new now really frames what do I need to do with what I have? But at the same time, I have to be asking the question, okay, well, all the needs in the world that I was selling to just changed in a large way. And so I have to create a new future. I have to go after and discover the needs in the world, whether my channel was blown up or, in some instances, how I serviced my space before is now radically changed. So I have to innovate. I have to reactivate growth. And the last part of the new future, not only innovation, is just I got to reform my systems. My system adaptability, capability, and culture, that learning velocity and its ability to really unlearn as a key indicator of success versus learning is what's central to this. So my system has to change. So the new now is about uniting, setting expectations, and operating, while the new future simultaneously happens. It's about reactivating growth and making the change systematically so that the company resilience is at an all-time high on the other side of this. So if you asked in our last call, you mentioned GM with Mary Barry was talking about if you asked her 6 months ago, would she be building a factory of ventilators, she'd say, that would take us a year to develop or 2 years to reach full factory. And they did it in weeks, right? Now, the political circumstances of that were difficult, but the point is they learned that they could move fast. They were durable. And now that the great reset has happened, I think you have the permission to look at the company through a different set of lenses, not because of its possibility, but because the demand will reveal the resiliency. Yeah. And once that, it's a gift, because once you realize that you can move fast when old truths are no longer worth preserving, then you have the ability to rediscover that resilience because you are granting the permission. Mm-hmm. And that's the moral authority that we have right now, is to actually go do it. And so to lower the cost of failure by permission, but also lower cost of failure because those systems are no longer worth it, now we create the ability to get to truth faster. And that is the moment I think we're in as a leader that creates a new resiliency going forward.
That's absolutely inspiring. I ran across a story that similarly I found really inspiring. So you're probably familiar with Dyson, the vacuum cleaner people, right? And 5 years ago, Dyson, the founder, fell in love with the idea of building an electronic vehicle. And he wanted to build an EV from the ground up, which his people would design. And Dyson's kind of famous for tackling really hard technological problems. And they work at them for years, potentially, until they come up with, they're sort of the Apple of the appliance world, right? They get premium prices. They make these great products. And at the sort of end of last year, he announced that he was shutting down the EV project because when he started it, the only real competitor was Tesla. And now what he's seeing is all the biggies, the large manufacturers have committed to EVs. So you got Volvo in there, BMW, But what was worrisome to him was that they were trying to make their vehicles price competitive with gasoline powered vehicles, and the trouble with that was it was going to mean that their target profit margins, and they try to get 25 to 30% margins, which for a hard goods manufacturer is pretty good, that they wouldn't be able to make it. So he made the tough decision to shut it down. And the business had been at this airfield in the middle of Britain, right? So the British government, in the light of COVID, so we're talking months, like not long time, had asked Dyson would they be able to increase the supply of ventilators that was available to the National Health Service. So they designed the thing in 10 days. They took all that production capacity, which they'd been staring at losing, in the face, and they've now converted it to the production of ventilators, and the NHS has now ordered 10,000 of them. Isn't that fascinating?
It's remarkable. It's happening everywhere. I think this is that rediscovery of that moment is just incredible. Also, the volume of bets. I think being able to go fast and start small. I see this in a couple of our partners like ABI and others who, their business is disrupted, but they've also pivoted to serving their community. They're launching, hundreds of products and sanitation offerings and using their proprietary gifts to do this work. They produce important sanitized water. They can make hand sanitation. They can launch offerings in the home for security because that's what they have to do for themselves. So at this rate of change that they're going, they're not trying to be perfect. They're trying to move options into the world to discover the truth, because the thing that teaches you from the outside in is the behaviors. It's because behaviors don't lie. Planning can lie. Strategy can lie. But when you're being in discovery mode, especially now, it's all about the ability to be taught from the outside in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I would observe is, and I know you and I share this, is for years we've lived in the world of uncertainty, right? Lots of assumptions, very little knowledge, lots you have to go learn. The challenge is really converting assumptions to knowledge at low cost. And when we talk about business portfolios, a very classic way of looking at it is, well, you've got some businesses that are largely in exploit mode, they're established, they exist. Then you've got some other things that are sort of getting ready to go to the market. And then we have all these options and little bets and experiments sort of on the periphery. Well, I think what COVID-19 has done is it's shoved all of us, all of our core businesses, all of the core operations that we assumed would be stable and ready and lasting forever. It's shoved everybody into this high assumption to knowledge space. And so one piece of advice I'm giving people, and I think Bionic's skills will be particularly relevant at doing this, is Andy Grove taught us, when you're in an inflection point and everything's up for grabs, what you need to do is generate as many ideas as you possibly can, as fast as you possibly can. And you when the pattern becomes more clear, okay, then it's time to heads down, diverge, and execute. But in the early stages, you need the raw material, right? So could you walk us through maybe a typical way that you would start looking for these total addressable problems? I think that's just such a fascinating process. And I know you document it in the book, but if you could maybe summarize for people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, it's a really, that TAM to TAP shift that reframing does is it no longer asks the question like, what ideas do we have, or what technology we have? And that's what people run to. They're like, well, what do we have in the R&D or the D of the R or in our teams? and that's a really important question, but it asks the question like, who has solutions? And so the famous question is like, how do you know what to make if you don't problem you're solving comes into order, right? So it's not about the technology right now. It's not about what we have. Asking, what is the actual need that changed, which is based in truth? And then who has secrets? Who has the answer inside the company? And whether that happens inside or outside the company, wherever the answer comes from is the answer. And that's the permission for truth, because it'll teach you what the company needs to become if it's not in us. If we're trying to make what we have work, we're limiting restricted boundaries, missions, and solving that. So that framework of moving from TAM to TAP, from linear portfolio, shifts the thinking from inside out, making the solution, the product for the customer, to solving with the customer. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do that is to launch enough volume to actually teach you. So if you launch one thing, you're going to make that idea work, creates bias. You sell a dream you can never unsell. The cost of failure drives up. When CEOs do the work that we do, they start realizing this kind of sad parody, but it's true, which is my company doesn't tell me the truth. Otherwise, good people, resilient, hardworking, good intent people can't tell the truth because the cost of failure is too high. So if you want commercial truth, you have to use first principles logic in volume and lower the cost of failure at a time right now that's more important than ever. So if you want to know the data behind this, is that you have to launch 20 to 30 bets in a portfolio with a 60% failure rate across the stage of investing to get to the 2 or 3 that are actually going to work. Mm-hmm. And here's why. Again, it's decision science and portfolio theory. 70-80% of all growth comes from 7% of capital deployed. So I make 100 bet or 10, it doesn't matter. That's 7 out of 100 are my unbounded returns.
Mm-hmm.
The rest is going to fail. I get my money back, it goes to zero.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is why? And the answer is this: the failure teaches you the success.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go back to the beginning and say, well, why did we make those bets? They have two decision criteria. One is conviction. Why us? Why now? Proprietary gift, outside force. Conviction. Number two is non-consensus. We make all of our money from the ideas with the highest disagreement rate in our decision making. And the reason why is because they're new to you and they're new to the world. We adversely select things that we know. So we show up with the addiction of being right, and we show up with the answer-driven leadership, and we don't allow learning unless it happens to you like a moment like now where your learning experience, et cetera, has been torn away. So the only thing you do is you must embrace the discomfort of learning new, which means that if you're seeking consensus right now, you're basically screwed. I mean it lovingly and candidly, which is there is absolutely no safety. And if you're looking for consensus, not only does the decision architecture of growth go against you, but the marketplace as well. So when this matters because it's there to teach you how to adapt, not you to teach the market how to adapt. It's really powerful, both in mindset and mechanic.
That's huge. That is absolutely huge. So the basic message here is if all of you are agreeing on something, it's probably not the answer. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, what you're looking for is that you need to have a group of a decision-making body where you have expertise and decision authority that allows them to make investments where their proprietary gift is the reason why. So there is a trust in this, but it's why managing directors of venture capital firms have decision authorities to make investment, and the group is there to gut check them. So for example, Andreessen Horowitz, when they make an investment decision, they try to talk each other out of it, so that they know if they all think it's a good idea, it's probably a bad idea. They're the opposite. In the same way, in voting architectures in a lot of funds, they do voting calculus where people will, in a non-biased way, vote on a deal anonymously or ask questions. So they're putting everything on the table without bias. So they can see the non-consensus high conviction decision so they can avoid it. They're trying to embrace proprietary gift with non-consensus because that's where the growth lives.
That's so interesting. So for our viewers, a couple of other things just to elaborate a bit on what David was saying is, as you get more senior in a company, right, it's harder and harder to get to the truth because people are more and more afraid, right? And so one of the practices I know some senior leaders do is when they're meeting, before the meeting, before anybody has a chance to say anything, certainly before the senior leader has indicated their preferences, they'll actually do what's called a nominal group technique, which is they'll write down and then share what they're each thinking. So it's another technique for kind of toning down the bias, the tendency to go with whatever the boss thinks or whatever, because it's so hard. It's hard to get to the truth.
Yes, that's something you need to gut check yourself in as well right now, which is that addiction of being right. I mean, listen, even in my own job, like today, where we're trying to lead our own company into this future, and while we have a lot of conviction in the value it creates, and it's we used to have to make the case for disruption. We don't have to make that anymore. We also are adapting rapidly. I mean, we have taken the best of pieces of what we do. And applied it towards, reactivating growth. I have a 100-day problem. I need to fix this thing immediately. And when you think about culture and transformation, the value of that can take, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to be realized. And while it's important to reform the systems in all this moment, because the value of preserving what you have is no longer valuable, you must recreate the operating system for growth, especially if you don't have one. But also we have acute needs. And so adapting as a company and offering today to go after re-engage, it's going to be this next phase, which is, hey, I used to sell product through dentists, and now there's no dentistry in the world that's going to be meeting anybody for the next 18 months. What do we do? So that's a need. So that concept, say, of distance learning, education, anything, is no longer some theoretical future. It actually is here right now. And so that is something that is so critical to get right in how you manage the ability to reactivate in short bursts to make sure you're not leaving opportunity on the table. So we're very focused on adapting down to those acute needs. But the theoretical is now applied physics. This is no longer research and strategy. It is brute force on offense, culturally, mindset, and systems to adapt to these changes. It's absolutely required at every level of organization.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about the companies you're working with right now, are they in hold mode? Are they in full steam ahead mode? Are they, some other in between? How are they sort of working with you as they try to figure this all out?
Yeah, so we're fortunate. We're focused on growth, and we're fortunate with partners who are more than 60 or 70% our partners are on the right side of this. They're in CPG. They're solving problems that are valued today. And we have a couple who are in a lot of pain because their channels changed radically. And so, they're amazingly smart, brilliant, people with amazing products that just their oxygen is no longer breathed in the same way. And some of it's a permanent change, and some of it will be a slow permanent change, but it's absolutely changing. So they're focusing on two different needs. One is the reactivating growth, which is, okay, what just happened? How did the need change? How do I get back to that need? My channel blew up. That's that 100-day on offense. But on the other flip side is I'm killing it. Suddenly my product that everyone thought was mediocre is now required to consume every day because people's priorities changed. I'm awash in capital. I'm awash in demand. So I'm making my big to bigger capture that. But also, they're also thinking, quite frankly, about the other side of this already because it will come down. And I think the question in their mind is, I'm going on offense right now. Is really around two frameworks. One is, I could be winning but losing on revenue, right? I'm growing my revenue, but am I really winning share? And so the revenue is the first metric. The second is share. But the third metric is really what's most important, which is, am I winning the customer need? And I think this third metric is in the back of everyone's mind, which we're helping go after, which is, if I'm winning but I'm losing, how do I make sure I'm winning but I'm winning when the need change? So as a percentage of the actual need, if I can't get that third metric, when the dust settles, I will have taken this opportunity and I will have not captured the need of the future. And so that is really an essential mindset of the people on offense now. On the defense side, it's really about going and quickly adapting to the change. That framework's slightly different. And I'll share this and then I'll hand the ball back to you, which is just a simple framework of one to one, one to many.
Okay.
That stack of where we're moving from to as a marketplace, my product offering to one to many. I used to sell one to many, but now I'm still selling just to that individual. And the question is when are we going to get back to an individual and an individual doing things? That's not our settling in place. I think that the reason why is because those bands of one to many are elastically changing over time right now based on governance, our availability to be around each other beyond our family, of event space, experiences, what's the physical environment. So getting the model innovation right across those boundaries, those skewed boundaries, when it has been disrupted is really the thinking that's going on and reactivating growth. How do I get from to through that model in motivation that allows my value to meet the need in the world where I used to make my money?
Right. And where you can't right now. So one of our listeners has asked you to expand on the concept of refounding.
Ooh, we caught that. Thank you for catching that. That's interesting you mentioned. It's it's the title of our next book, but it's also.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. That's not now it's public, but it's really about the job. What's the CEO's job of today? And it's not a job. So a founder is typically a co-founder. There's two co-founders of Bionic. There's a founder typically at a company. That's a singular job. The refounder is the job to be done for most CEOs today, especially now this future has been accelerated. The digital transformation strategies are now today's strategies, right? So they're not things theoretical. So the refounder's job is really about how do I go back and take it back to day one. And Alex, you mentioned his new book, The Invincible Company, is a perfect example of how do you implement a day one company. And we've talked about that for years. Jeff Bezos' entire blog is based on that, which is.
Could you just expand on that? Because not everybody will know that example.
Yeah. So a day one company is really what Jeff Bezos has been writing about for years. in his own philosophy of how he's leading Amazon. And it really captures basically a growth mindset that really is around his first shareholder letter in 1997, about how I think. And he said, a company that's a day one company has the attitude, hunger, and passion, and the ability to move and adapt instantly. So its willingness to take risks and its energy is so profound because the enthusiasm is as good as it gets. So what does that mean in practice? From a management perspective, a day one mindset it obsesses about customer behaviors because they're the path to market leadership. Secondly is they embrace force as the growth drivers. And here's a secret of entrepreneurs and VCs, which is when you're successful, it probably has nothing to do with you. It's because it happened to you. You had a hypothesis of the future, problem, need, future. It showed up and you weren't dead when it happened and you have to be executing well. That's why you have to see these great fortunes because they're outside force driven. COVID is an outside force. It's shared experience. It's not one thing, it's everything. And that's why it's so huge. The third thing is you got to make bold versus timid investments. You don't carefully go into a space. You go on offense with a high failure rate. Is what teaches you. So the fourth is you have to take it as a portfolio approach. Some bets will work, some will not. It's decision science. Architecting those portfolios is actually science. We've done it for 7 years with billions of dollars. What's the pattern? The last three are really learning from failures. And so you hear about don't let failure go to your head, but you want to get to it quickly and fast so you can get out of the dark alleys into the light. And staying lean and fast is a huge part of that. And last is you have to change the incentives. So day one companies value little things, right? They're not $50 million little options. They look at that as new oxygen. They're not 50, they're worth 500 because they're creating the new core. And so when you see leaders like David Taylor at P&G start this 4 years ago with Mark Pritchard and Kathy Fish, and at Nike and at Growth, at General Mills and TDA, all of our partners, those CEOs are thinking and acting this way, but they need to do it systematically. Bionic is the how to this mindset as a way to work. One of our partners said, it's like the anti-Six Sigma, which goes back full circle to what you were saying before for this era.
Totally. It's funny, years ago, when Jim McNerney was still the CEO of 3M, I got brought in there and to do some teaching and education work. And one of the things he was trying to do was bring Six Sigma into the world of innovation at 3M. And it was kind of like tissue rejection. I mean, it's the wrong methodology for that particular set of activities, right? Discovering the new. Another question was whether this kind of thinking can be applied to social ventures.
So yes, we work closely with Venture for America, very close with Acumen Fund and Deborah and others who look at these tools for management for their own work. They're all modeling the venture and entrepreneurship skill and the way they're leading their own impact. Mm-hmm. Scott Harris at Charity Water very similarly thinks through a growth mindset and as almost like a venture investor as well. So absolutely, the short answer is absolutely. If you're talking about it as an organization for social venture, like you're deploying capital as a foundation, 100%. This is exactly how you should be running it for reaction, speed, adaptability. If you're thinking about it as a founder, right? I think there's a deeper set of questions about what should I be doing right now to save or solve my company, right? And I would share this one set of mindsets for you, which is this came out of a book I wrote called The Startup Playbook about 10 years ago, and or maybe 8 years ago. And I wrote it just coming through the middle of my last company that was going through its own big pivot. And so I went out and talked to 40 plus entrepreneurs, some of the best in the world: Elon Musk, Sarah Blakely, Robin Chase, Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn fame, who wrote the foreword, Seth Godin, Chris Anderson, others. And asked them basically,
group.
Yeah, it's crazy. It was 300 hours one-on-one. It's amazing, of just how to bet your life. And what they all said was basically the same 5 lenses in this order. And this is a question you have to ask yourself in this moment of disruption. The first lens was, why me? Why us? And it's the same question at these other CEOs were asking. What exactly is our proprietary gift? What is the thing that we can do that no one in the world can do right now? And I think that right now, if you're trying to chase capability, like what do we have? And like And if it's not true, it will be exposed to be not true. So you must return to that proprietary gift, because if you can't be the best in the world at it, it's unlikely you will be. The second lens is extreme focus. If I could over communicate this again, it's so important, is fewer things, higher impact based in giftedness. If you have, in a way, optionality is your enemy. So proprietary gift with extreme focus. The third is you got to build painkillers and not vitamins. Vitamins are options, right? You want them to be true, they're not true. Painkillers solve chronic, lifelong, malignant customer pain that's impossible to replicate. That's your path out of the woods. The fourth lens is the 10X factor. And this is a confused idea, but the idea is this. If you stripped away everything you did in the company, all your revenue, the one thing that the entire company sits on, that 10X factor, is the competitive advantage and the permanence in the world, which means we need to asymmetrically invest in that thing that's literally impossible to replicate. So the last lens is just permanence, is how do we stay in the life of our customer with intention forever, or at least 3 years. But those lenses right now are so critical to get right. What is our proprietary gift? How are we maintaining extreme focus on a single problem? What is our painkiller? How or what can be 10 times better with permanence? So foundation as a system, absolutely. As a founder, those lenses are a gift. They're a gift to me. They're a gift to you, to the world, I think, because that is how the best in the world think in these moments of how to get through this.
That's really inspiring. And I'm your painkillers, not vitamins point, I think is so important, because, you know, I talk to a lot of people right now, and we're gathering a lot of data, and people are really confusing predictions with preferences with facts. So people are making a lot of predictions right now about, oh, you know, the world is going to be like this when we're all through this. And they're really just preferences. They're not based on any kind of data or facts. And I think that confusing vitamins with painkillers, I just see that going on a lot right now.
Yes.
As we move through this. Just on the social venturing theme, another resource for our listeners is Jim Thompson and Ian McMillan, some years back, wrote a really great book called The Social Entrepreneur's Playbook. And what they do in that book, and this will be familiar to you, David, they take the technique of discovery-driven planning, but they apply it to social ventures, where their definition of social ventures is, you know, a business that's got to produce profits, but it's also got to produce a social outcome. And so they do things like, if you're going to increase the amount of chicken feed in a farm in Nigeria, you know, how do you do that in a way that allows the venture to be self-sustaining, but also solves the problem of, say, chicken population or chicken nutrition or something. So it's called The Social Entrepreneur's Playbook. And then there's an HBR article that goes with it, which is called How to Make Social Ventures Really Work. So those are some resources I can recommend. And if you didn't catch it, just write me and I'll catch up with you again. So another question from our listeners is, what do you think will stick? Like the consumer behavior has been really kind of upended in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways not. And I hear pundits and experts saying, oh, don't be ridiculous. When this is all behind us, we're just going to go back to business as usual. And then the other extreme is, oh, no, everything's up for grabs. It's all going to change. And I just wonder what, in your view, are some things that we might keep with us after this sort of moment is past?
That's a great question. I think you said before, habits form between 30 and 67 days, right? So I'd be in the hunt for habits in big new needs is one way to think about that. Though those are where some of those answers live. Mm-hmm. But also I think it's important to go back to just first principles. Like what's true about being human? What's true about what we value with all the noise? All the noise has been stripped away. But what are the needs? The needs for connection, the needs for community, the needs for self-care, the needs for experience are going to change, right? I think we're going to, if I were to predict anything that I believe to be true, I think those valuing of those things, experience over things, will be even more reinforced. Mm-hmm. But also hyper-local. Mm-hmm. Hyper-local is going to be a huge part of the way we think about value. Mm-hmm. And the painkiller versus vitamins are just is the quality of the answers to those questions, I think, is underneath it all. Like, how good is my self-care? How good is candidly, my mental health? How good is my relationships? How good if my time, energy, and money are direct reflection of what I value, do I like that truth? Mm-hmm. And we have time right now to sit back and, look at our budgets and look at our forecasting, look at our time and our energy. And, there's this, Bezos talks about this regret minimization framework about, if he looked back in his life, what would he regret not doing? Mm-hmm. And I'd just say, what would be your regret minimization framework for this moment? Like, and if we are absolutely locked down for a minimum of 30 more days, at least in this area of the country. And we're 60 days. I'll just speak personally and more vulnerably. I've sat in my office just like this for 12, 14-hour days, and because things are so busy and so urgent and so exciting. Like I'm more conviction, more bullishness on our future than ever before. Mm-hmm. But I'm also looking back and I'm asking, like, I have 3 beautiful sons. Like, do I want that time, that month, to be as valuable to them as it is to me? Mm-hmm. So I think we have a chance to say, really, what do you want to do with it? Yeah. And I don't need to come out fitter, smarter, faster, but I can control my time.
That's right.
My choice.
And I think people are so hungry for that notion of control. And I think another thing that I've observed is, if you'd asked us 3 months ago, 4 months ago, would you make all this investment in remote working, upgrading your bandwidth, learning to use all these new tools, operating remotely, giving people a lot more leeway because you can't be sitting on top of them all the time. I mean, it's whether you wanted to or not, you're not going to be able to control a workforce that's largely remote. And we all would have said, yeah. Well, of course, that's important. We'll get to that, right? And I think what's happened in the interim is we've now all been shoved into having made a whole series of investments, both of time and of money and of learning in all these new technologies. And I don't think we're going to give up on those investments just because it's no longer a crisis. I think we are learning a whole lot of new ways of being and interacting with each other that just weren't possible before. So I don't see us kind of throwing that into reverse and saying, okay, we're going to go back to being cogs in some sort of bureaucratic wheel again. Another thing that I think is kind of interesting is if you think about the kind of work you do, the kind of work I do, how do you see those kinds of venture design or venture activity translating into a virtual format if you can't physically be with people for another 30 days?
I mean, we're learning this. I mean, one of our number one goals is to create, for obvious reasons, remote growth as a superpower. I think everybody has to learn. I mean, there are basic things I think you got to show up and we say, everyone says lead with empathy. It's an important thing, but you got to show up with safety and kindness in a way that is really extraordinary right now. All the ambience things and permission you have to be rad can and direct just doesn't really work in the same way because you don't have emotional and physical safety. So how you lead is really important. The venture stuff, remote growth, if I look at a lot of startups successfully build companies remotely. I think there's it's an absolute myth that you have to be together always to be a good culture and a good community and stuff. In fact, my commute in New York City every day when I drive, because it's my only alone time, takes me 2.5, 3 hours a day. And that's 90,000 calories a year of exercise that I lose. That makes me better, happier, stronger. It's time, it's just time. So I think the question of can we grow remotely, I think is going to become not as big an issue, which was going to affect commercial real estate and other things. So not to get the whole prediction path, but I don't look at the venturing model as getting too disrupted because if there's any one group in the world that's supposed to be the most adaptable, supposed to be most flexible, supposed to be so resilient, if they can't get over working from home and getting more time back to think, work, and be healthier, we're all dead. So I think it's just will be a greater adoption of both mindset, mechanics, and systems to create growth than ever before. Yeah, it can be done. It's the final nail in the coffin from casual Fridays to distance success.
And we learned it can be done. So, I mean, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, who've said, hey, we've had a month of this. It's kind of working out. Why do I need to be spending $10 million on San Francisco real estate? Seriously, why?
I say that we just built a beautiful new space in New York in this last year and a half. We've always had, and so experience is a huge part of this. And So we feel it. So I'm with you on that. We value it. It's so important to find things. The question is how much of it. Being together, being a physical environment that curates and cultivates, that's vital. The question is to what degree does it affect, is the return on that valuable?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're likely to see a blend, right? And I mean, even at Columbia, I don't actually have an office at Columbia. We hotel because, if I'm doing my job, I'm in a classroom or somewhere. I'm not sitting in my office. So it was a kind of a recentering of that. I'm going to get to some other questions. Before we do that, I'm going to ask you to tell a story about the first time Beth Comstock brought you in to speak at the big leadership meeting in Boca, which has become business school legend. But I love the way you're sort of a provocateur in that moment. So maybe you could tell that story.
Yeah. So it wasn't as intentional as it sounds now, but this literally happened word for word. So I just sold my last company and it published the Startup Playbook, which was my first business book. I wrote a series called The Intellectual Devotional for a couple of years prior to that. And so this was my first business book. And Beth, who's an old friend, we used to have breakfast every year at TED for 12, 13 years. And she, when I told her I was working the project, she said, "You need to come do this at GE." And she was the vice chairman, the head of global innovation, arguably one of the best in the world. Huge
job. I mean, huge.
GE for years was on time with all the major outside forces. So they were able to adapt, but the question was, could they adopt? Mm. And that was the big firewall between adaptation. You could do all the new stuff you want with the best and most talented in the world. The question is, can it get inside?
Yeah, so the mothership problem, right?
And ownership and mindset. And Beth was trying to get this powerful platform of Echo, health, digital inside, and it just was blocked. Despite all the talk, words, do versus say. So she invited me to come down, and I literally had no idea what BOCA was. Global Leadership Meeting, GLM, as to your point, written about HBS, et cetera, for decades now. And so I showed up in flip-flops from our vacation, and she said, you need to go get changed. I had no idea it was the Ritz, and she bought 800 copies of the book. I had no idea how big it was. It was 800 people in the audience. And then Jeff Immelt, then CEO. So I had to go down to the shop and get buy clothes. So I looked like a golfer, and I look like an idiot because I suck at golf, and I have ADD, and so I'm looking hilarious. And so I get on stage with two other people and do this session, a Q&A. And so at the end of the session, she asked me a final question to everybody. She said, "What would be your question that you would ask GE as a radical outsider?" And off the cuff,
that's in the audience. Let me just put the context. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this thing, what GE did for decades was, once a year they would gather all the senior leaders, and so maybe 2,000 people at this huge event in Boca. Jeff Immelt, all of his lieutenants, everybody's there, standing at attention. And this is the big moment when we're thinking about what the next year is going to hold for this massive, massive giant company. Very fancy, very nice. The food is great. Everybody loves to network. And so Immelt's in the first row, and everybody's around him. And here comes David in his golf outfit.
Yes. And Beth poses this question, and I was the last. And so what I said is, this is verbatim. It's in her book too. As I said, Jeff, pointed down the row, who I didn't know at the time, I said, "How many $50 million companies did you launch last year?" And I said, "I bet the answer is 0. And if I were you, I would be terrified. How is it possible with 300,000 employees and 90 billion in the bank that doesn't happen all the time?" So Beth looks at me, who's a very beloved friend. She's like, "Tell us how you really feel." She was sort of annoyed. And but she encouraged it, to her credit. She said, push the buttons, which are not that button. And so total to I literally walked to the stage, almost, it was like a golf clap, get out of here. So, but, and honestly, to his credit, and I admire him on a lot of levels, Jeff got out of his seat, he walked backstage, and he said, "That was a very powerful question. You're going to come fix this," which I literally responded, "No, I'm not. I just started our company." And he went on stage and he closed that session saying that was the most important question in 37 years since he started GLM with Jack Welch. And then 2 months later, he wrote to all 980,000 shareholders that the Startup Playbook and Lean Startup were central to the way he's thinking about the future, because they had been working with Eric Ries for 6 months on 4 projects, testing Lean. And so we launched something where we kind of went around the world teaching Lean. I was kind of the opening keynote on growth mindset. He was Lean. And what happened, we learned is that, you can try to create the Six Sigma and belts for Lean Startup. It just, it's not the problem. You go in and you talk to the employees and you're like, how is it going with, lean startup? They're like, we don't have an employee problem. And what was missing was really what Bionic solved was growth boards and growth systems that integrate to do this. And so now 7 years later, building a fairly large company doing this, the IP, we're kind of on 5 and 6.0 of this now, that's built up to be a system that's really impossible to replicate. The learning alone and the results and the math and the data is really incredible. But it happened because of that question. And I love Beth. She's amazing, and she started us, and she's one of the most courageous people, if not the most courageous executive I've ever been around. She's amazing.
She's amazing. And I did a fair amount of teaching, with various programs for her at GE. And it was fascinating because there were these wonderful pockets of new stuff. And yet the mothership kind of made a really big bet on a really, difficult situation. And I would argue it was kind of antithetical to the seeing around corners idea. They bet on one scenario, that fossil fuels would continue to dominate in the world of power.
Yep.
And it also raises this issue, which I've brought up before, which is, the world is uncertain. Life is uncertain. You don't always get it right. And that doesn't mean you can't learn something. So, the fact that GE got itself into some trouble doesn't mean that everything they did stank, right? And I always find it's so frustrating because people sort of take a company like Nokia would be a great example, right? Because Nokia got into trouble in its handset business, everything they knew, everything we learned from them is no longer true. And I just think that's such a narrow way of looking at the world.
Well, it's simply not true. That in fact, there's usually a systemic issue around learning, almost always bias. Mm-hmm. That's not the fact they did amazing things. They built amazing things. They're amazing people. They're totally brilliant. They're equally as smart as everybody in this call. They worked like crazy for decades. They're incredible, totally incredible. And they made a bet on a future that came a lot faster. And this is the point, is that I think we're moving from an era of Vanessa Colella says it's a city, from theoretical physics of strategy, brilliant people telling you what's coming, to applied physics. Mm. This is about learning. Mm-hmm. Learning in a different model that teaches you as opposed to coming with an answer. Mm-hmm. I just think in a world where exponential forces, which were theoretical, are now real, if your ability to learn and adapt and very quickly is going to be the central resilient characteristics of companies that thrive versus the ones that are damaged going forward, irreparably. Mm-hmm. But the good news is totally fixable.
Totally.
You just have to be the refounder, which is the point. You have to be able to be the refounder. You have to have day ones. We're gonna go back to basics and get this skill in place to be able to go do this.
And I'd like to borrow another concept that Bezos talks about a lot. And then there was a question about M&A activity, which we should get to too. But the concept from Bezos is, he says, we have to understand that there's two types of decisions that you can make. So type 1 decisions are irreversible. They're highly consequential. They're very risky. You can't easily divert from them. So something like General Electric's big bet on fossil fuels in the power generation business is an example of a type 1 decision. That requires very careful consideration, deep thought, right? Then there's type 2 decisions. Type 2 decisions are, you walk through the door, you don't like what you find on the other side, you walk back again, right? It's reversible, it's low cost, it's fast, it's quick. And he said what tends to happen in large organizations, and it creates this learning challenge, right? What tends to happen in large organizations is they treat every decision as though it's a type 1 decision. I've worked in companies where you had to submit the same 10-page detailed document with all these supporting spreadsheets for a $50,000 experiment as you do for a $5 million plant, and it's treating everything with that sort of type 1 lens. And so I think just a useful idea as we're in this environment where learning is at such a premium is to really say there should be relatively few type 1 decisions and a lot more type 2 decisions as you're learning. But then your point about focus is once you've learned enough, then you really have to go for it. And then you're now in the world of type 1, which is that interesting kind of journey that we have to lead.
Yep, I agree that we practice that. We play the same playbook. Between that and OKRs and our own model experimentation, we lead the whole company that way. It has to be central to the playbook.
What are your OKRs? I'd be fascinated. I don't know what they are.
So OKRs were kind of created by Google and Kleiner over the last sort of 20, 30 years, a way to run fast with your organizations. Mm-hmm. Dewar, who was the founders of Kleiner, wrote a book called Measure What Matters, which describes how to do OKRs. It's called Objective Key Results. And it's kind of like a division. There's objective divided by key results. And it's designed to be able to set macro results, macro OKRs on an annual basis that you can measure quarterly, so that you can revisit the OKRs quarterly to discover, are these the right objectives and these the right key results, so you can move and change quickly, which is another Bezos law, which is like, he's got absolute conviction until he's wrong, right? And I need more of that even in my own life. I have very good, challenging co-founders who are just like, come after me, and I'm biased. So being able to unlearn is vital here. OKRs is a system that takes you from annual goals, which are important, down to quarterly, but in a very elastic way. So it's always based on learning. It also means that as goal setting, I can create a North Star for the company and then have every individual adapt their personal team and division goals to it, because it's their job to interpret the outcome and then apply it to their business. Mm-hmm. So if the objectives are macro, but they have to completely adapt that reality to what they're responsible for and what they're hooked for to the measurement. Mm-hmm. So it's not hierarchical, it's almost a network, but it's a framework to manage it with a flexibility based on what you are learning.
And I think that's going to be even more valuable right now, because there is such a premium on learning. So we have a couple of minutes left. Any advice? I wouldn't say advice, but if our audience could take a couple of actions, just to get them out of being frozen, what kind of actions might they be able to take, just as individuals, just for themselves?
Well, I think one of the things I'm thinking a lot about, just on a personal level, which is I shared about like the regret minimization framework. How like in 30 days from now, like what do I want to not regret having done with my life, both personally and professionally? Mm-hmm. And that's not about performance and fixing an old shame. It's about like, what do I want to do with this time? And I think that's really important, because it's a gift. And then, but the other part is just to think about how to lead yourself. So there's the framework I'm thinking a lot about is just, I have a controllable, not controllable, knowable, unknowable view of the world right now. And I'm staying inside of that box, in the controllable, knowable. Because if I'm spending time outside of it, I'm actually, it's the disservice of all the people that I work with, lead, and love, because it's what leads to failure. And I shared this earlier today, which was a story about one of my friends, Sycamore Rao, who at Columbia, talked about how the Navy SEALs hired Columbia University to figure out like how you survive the Navy SEAL BUDS test, right? And what they discovered is that there's really two mindsets in that extremely difficult test. One was taskers who do the task, then sleep, task, and they, and then the other group are optimizers who manage their energy across all that's coming at them, predict, optimize, sleep. So they optimize, predict, sleep. So which group fails 90% of the time? The answer is optimizers, because the very nature of a crisis is unknowable. So if you're trying to optimize towards the unknowable, there's two things that happen to you. One is you waste cycles of energy trying to predict something that you can't fix. And the second is you never rest. Mm-hmm. And so over 7 days of that hell week, what kills you is the rest. You never get restored. But if you can just manage the controllable and knowable in this moment as a leader, as an individual, you have the ability to manage, because you have choice. Man's search for meaning, Viktor Frankl, right? I always have the keys because I can choose what's important and then focus the energy. And then most importantly is set it down. Rest, get restored. Make sure you're doing the most important things and get up and do the same thing tomorrow and the same thing after the day, and stay in a place where you can move through this moment being your best self, because you don't have to be in control, because there's a myth in the first place. So that is, I leave you with that, because that's a lot of what I'm trying to live out. It's hard and it's a struggle, but it's the most important thing to get right now.
I think that's so inspiring. So if people want to learn more, if people want to find out about Bionic and you, and maybe want to work with you, what do they do?
Well, you can email us, or just email me, david@onbionic.com. You can go to OnBionic. You can, those are two easy ways. I'm happy to be helpful to you in any way, send you books, talk, share more with Rita. But I say thank you, Rita. You've been very good to us, very good to me, very grateful for it. And so thank you for this.
What an absolute pleasure to chat to you. And good luck with the next sprint.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.